Hello and welcome to Naturally Scott. I'm Scott Harris, and I'm bringing you our 23rd podcast. I can't believe we're already on number 23, but pretty excited about it. Today's podcast is with Mike Parr, and if you watch this, you're going to learn how a Brit became president of the American Bird Conservancy and the great work that they are doing on behalf of birds throughout the Americas, and not just North America, but through Mexico and Central and South America as well. And they are doing some terrific work, and I think you'll really enjoy seeing what they're doing about saving habitat and saving birds. You're going to learn about his beautiful new book, Birds of the Tropical Andes. Amazing book. I had the pleasure of reading it. It's filled with great pictures and stories and tips and reasons for visiting these various spots that are highlighted in the book. Lots of inside information on places to visit, birds you can expect to see, and the best way to see them. So if you're down doing some Central and South American birding through the Andes, this is a book you've got to have. Now you're also going to hear him tell a story about dressing up as a Kentucky warbler as a young man, and how there's still a little bit of bitterness all these decades later about the way that went. You got to listen to that. And of course, you're going to want to hear how as a teenager, Mike wound up marooned, hungry, and cold on a remote Scottish island. He also had a great birding day while he was there, but he had some trouble, and it was interesting how he got into the trouble, interesting how he handled it, and interesting how he got out. And when the interview with Mike is done, we're going to do field notes, and today's field notes are on White Sands National Park. If you're not familiar with it, it's a pretty new park. It's out in New Mexico. It's gorgeous. I was just down there, and I'll share some information and a couple of stories about my trip down there. So let's get right into it and enjoy this conversation with Mike Parr, president of the American Bird Conservancy. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to today's podcast, Naturally Scott. I'm Scott Harris, and we've got a good one lined up for you. The gentleman that you're looking at the screen there, the handsome gentleman, by the way, in case you want to differentiate between the two, is Mike Parr. He's president of the American Bird Conservancy, and we're going to talk about that today and what the ABC does and what Mike's role is. But first, I want to say thank you to Mike. He's not only a guest on the podcast, he's a guest on the book you've heard me talk about before, Why We Love Birds, and that's a fascinating chapter. And we're going to hit a couple of the highlights from the conversations we've had on that. But before we roll too much further into this, we want to talk about Birds of the Tropical Andes, which is a new bird that Mike has out. And it's a terrific bird. Terrific book. They were kind enough to send it to me, and I was able to go through it. And I was inspired both by what you wrote and by what Owen shot. Some great pictures. So we're going to go. After we're done with this, we're going to go back to England, bring it back to the present, talk about a lot of things. But tell us about the book. I mean, you've got to be excited. It's a brand new book.
Yeah, it's kind of a labor of love, like most books tend to be that I've been involved in. You know, Owen and I met over a photograph of a black and white owl that he'd taken, which he'd posted on Facebook a few years ago. And I noticed this photo, and I thought that the lighting was really good. The composition, it was a nice picture. It was taken at night of a black and white owl. And I've always struggled with owls at night. They're one of the hard birds to photograph and get everything good. And he'd gotten a good picture.
They're
so I called him up.
Find.
Yeah, they're always difficult. And black and white owls, particularly striking species. It's not super rare, but you know, every time you see one, it's always a bird that's going to make you happy. So I just called Owen up and I said, hey, how did you get this pic? And he sort of gave me some settings and stuff like this. And then the conversation just kind of led from there. And we ended up doing a book together, Bringing Back the Birds, which has been out for a while now with Mountaineers Books. And American Bird Conservancy works in the tropical Andes. We work all over the Americas, but we work a lot in the tropical Andes. So I find myself down there working on projects from time to time, taking people down to see projects and so forth. And I'd gone down a couple of times, and I remember I was down in the Mindo area of Ecuador where some folks may have been already. It's a great birding area. And I just thought this is going to be a place that Owen's going to love. So he and I just went down there to do some bird photography, and we started building up this sort of collection of images. And he puts them on his website, which is really cool. But at some point, I just thought, you know, we've got enough pictures here for a book. And one morning before I drank any coffee and my brain wasn't working properly, we were driving up to Birdwatcher's house near Mindo. And I said, hey, Owen, you know what do you think about doing a book with this? And he's like, yeah, let's do a book. And I'm like, yeah, let's do a book. And I'm like, just agreed to do a book. So at that point, it's like, okay, we're doing a book, and we had a lot of cloud forest birds. Cloud forest is great for bird diversity. And as you move up through the altitude, you get like different suites of species in north and south. And it's pretty cool. Lots of different species there. But to represent the Andes properly, you can't just do cloud forest. So we basically mapped out a number of trips, I guess you could call them expeditions, to complete the book with a field team, myself, Owen, Nathan Goldberg, Juan Carlos Crespo, were our main field team, the four of us, and then we had other people working with us. But basically, we kind of mapped out where the gaps were in terms of like the major ecosystems where we were lacking imagery, and then we planned out our trips to complete the whole sort of photographic experience of the tropical Andes. We ended up doing a little bit less in Colombia. Owen had been to Colombia before, so I had a collection from Colombia. But we did a lot together, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia. We did a lot in Bolivia towards the end of the trip, particularly in the very high altitude areas, particularly for the flamingos. And then we did some in Amazonian Peru. And you might say, well, Amazonia is not the Andes, but this is kind of where the water from the Andes and the foothills first starts to kind of flatten out. And so you still got, relatively fast running water there. And macaws will get up to 3,000 feet. Sins will get up to 3,000 feet. You're kind of on the edge of the foothills just getting into Amazonia, and Amazonia depends on the Andes. It's a system. The whole hydrology of Amazonia depends on the Andes. So we included some of these birds that are just into the kind of western edge of the Amazon, like some of the large macaws. So we photographed those, and that sort of completed the book. So that's kind of the more or less the story of the book. And then I wrote the text in, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. Once just sort of crunched it out, once we'd kind of selected the pics and how we were going to do the flow of the story kind of goes from the west to the east over the Andes, starting from the Pacific slope and actually from the Pacific Ocean itself, because the subduction zone where the Andes starts is actually offshore. So you have these kind of rich upwellings along the Peruvian and Chilean coast where you have, a lot of seabirds, and then you get into the west slope, which is very wet in the north, very, very dry in the south, and it goes through these intergrades up into the Amazon, the Andes, and then down into the Amazon. So the book kind of takes you on this journey west to east, and also somewhat north to south, from the Chocó, it's very wet, to the Atacama, it's very dry. You can really kind of get a picture of the whole system that way. So that's kind of how we did it.
Well, that's spectacular. I read the book and I loved it. I was fascinated by both what you wrote and then all the photographs. And it's not something that would be characterized as a field guide or as a travel guide, but you do drop in a lot of information about places to go and spots to hit. I know I'm going to be in Mindo in September. My wife and I are going to go down, I think, for a week before we go to the Galapagos on a trip. We're taking a Nat Geo venture while we're down there. And so for me, I was going through and reading, I go, ooh, I can see, that would be a great one to see. Did you have a favorite? Is there if you could only go back to one of the areas that you highlighted, is there one it would be?
Well, whenever I go back these days, I'm always looking for things I haven't seen before. So I have my favorite places, but I also kind of branch out. I'm still looking for those tricky ground cuckoos. So I haven't seen it. I still haven't seen any ground cuckoos. Banded ground cuckoo is like, man, missed banded ground cuckoo several times. Oh, I mean, I'd probably, if, next trip, I'll try and loop in, Milpay in Ecuador is a good place to look for banded ground cuckoo. I'll probably try and loop in Milpay. Might go in September of 26, actually. We're probably doing an ABC trip down there. Some of my favorite places, I mean, the Mindo area. Have you been there before?
No, this will be a first.
Okay. I mean, the Mindo area is it's like paradise for birders. There's probably nothing like it on the planet. I mean, there's lots of great birding places, but that's really up there as one of the top places. And the whole community has kind of oriented towards bird tourism. There's all these little places you can stop along the road where you'll find a family set up some feeders, a little bit of habitat. And it all really comes from some of the groups that got involved in doing conservation in the area early on, like ourselves, BirdLife, some of the other groups, Mindo Cloud Forest. There's a range of groups that have been working there, but a lot of the birding economy, which it basically is a birding economy there, is driven by local people who have set up facilities for birding tourists. And then birding tourism is driving conservation because people make a living out of the forest remaining intact because they need forest for birds. And so it's a self-reinforcing system, which is great. And it's exactly the kind of thing we want to see in lots of places we work where, you can kind of set up an anchor reserve, but then that draws attention from birders. And then with birders coming in, somebody else say, wow, look at this. If I could just put some feeders on my property, maybe they will come here. And it's kind of in the Mindo area, it's really ballooned. So you've got the Yanacocha Reserve up on the slopes of Pichincha higher up. And then one of the people who worked there set up this kind of private reserve at Zuraloma, which is a little bit lower down. And Zuraloma is great. And it has a different set of birds from Yanacocha. And then you go around to Mindo and you've got Punto Ornithologico, where, the kids are feeding hummingbirds by hand. The local children are feeding hummingbirds by hand because somebody had the idea to put that together. And then Angel Paz with the ant pitta feeding at Paz de las Aves, and then Mash Piamagusa, which is just unbelievable Choco lowland habitat with things like mossback tanager. And literally, mossback tanagers will feed from your hand. Velvet purple coronets will land on your finger or on your cell phone, and because they're habituated to come in. So it's like bird photographer's dream. Birdwatcher's House near Mindo, run by Vinicio Perez. I mean, that place is amazing. He has these moth feeders where he puts a UV light on a sheet. And then in the morning, you go there and you're going to have, masked trogons, striped tree hunters, gold crown flycatchers, turquoise jays, all of those birds that normally, a lot of those would be army ant followers. But the sheet feeders are like an army ant swarm because army ants, they kill other insects. And then birds follow them to they don't feed on the ants, they feed on the insects around the ant swarm. But these sheets are like a kind of artificial ant swarm because the large insects come to the sheets. So ant swarm birds will come there. And it's so difficult to get ant swarm birds because army ant swarms are super unpredictable. They really don't stay in one place except for like seasonally. Occasionally they do. But mostly they're like, who knows where they're going to be. That's why those ground cookers are so tough because they're amongst the army ant swarm obligates.
Okay,
But,
so
yeah.
explain to the audience, for those who don't know, what the army ant swarm is. What are those followers? What's happening there?
Yeah, so you get these large groups of ants, which are kind of roving around on the forest floor looking for food. They kind of move in troops, very large troops of ants, and they feed on what they find on the forest floor. And that's often larger insects, but they don't always kill the insects. They might feed on them, but they might just, maim them, and the birds follow them and they'll swoop down and grab a larger insect, which might be kind of hidden, like a grasshopper or something like that. A katydid might be hidden, but then when the ants move past it, it might reveal itself and open its wings, and then the birds will swoop in and grab it. And so they follow the ant swarms around, and you have, obligates, which follow the ant swarms pretty much always. And then some birds which are more opportunist, which will kind of jump in once in a while, but they also feed on things that aren't connected to ant swarms. So you get these sort of ant swarm obligates, and then, I would say birds that are prone to follow ant swarms, but not exclusively. It's interesting, like birds like a hooded warbler. Hooded warblers are ant swarm followers, funnily enough, on their wintering grounds. I've seen hooded warblers around ant swarms in the Yucatan a few times. It's just a really interesting thing that, obviously we don't have ant swarms here, but they're adapted to follow ant swarms as one of their feeding strategies. So that's sort of what happens with these ant swarms. It's not that the birds feed on the ants, it's that they look for these larger insects which are disturbed or injured or what have you by ants, and then they grab them. It's very unpredictable, as I said, but these sheet feeders attract large insects, attract the ant swarm birds like the tree hunters and things like that. Some of the ant birds. So it's pretty cool. And Zuraloma does similar stuff. And then there's all the, hummingbirds. I mean, I haven't even mentioned the hummingbirds. The hummingbirds are kind of the most insane part of that whole area, and the Andes as a whole. I mean, it's like you can have 30 species of hummingbird on a trip would be that's kind of a baseline, right? It's like, that's a starting point. And you can go from there. So, it's an amazing part of the world for birds. And it's very important for bird conservation because you get a lot of these species are very highly restricted in their range. And they've evolved on maybe one mountaintop in one valley or one small part of the Andean slope. And the Andes and Brazil's Atlantic forest are probably the two places in South America where you get the most range-restricted species, and also the areas that are most densely settled, or amongst the most densely settled areas, and the ones where things like cattle pasture, clearance for cattle pasture, probably happening still at a higher rate. So not only do you have birds with very small ranges, but you also have quite high threats in those areas. So it's super important for bird conservation, not just for birding. It's amazing for birding. It's really important for bird conservation because, those are some of the species which are most at risk when they have very small ranges and they're highly threatened. And our work really at American Bird Conservancy really focuses on making sure these species have protected areas. That's one of our major programs, is to make sure every endangered bird in the Americas, and a lot of this works in Latin America, are included in the protected area network that we have. So that's national parks, private protected areas. We establish protected areas with partners. It's a big part of it. We buy land, we create protected areas for these rare species. And a lot of that is driven and funded by bird watching tourism, like in Mindo. And we're trying to get the whole concept that's working in Mindo applied elsewhere. Costa Rica is a great country where there's a lot of bird tourism already, but it's growing in Colombia, it's growing in Peru, it's growing in Bolivia, it's growing in Brazil. There's a huge birding community in Brazil. So this is one way that we can solve the biodiversity loss problem, is conserving these species that are very restricted, because the birds are indicators for other species that might be restricted to small areas, and then sustaining that through bird watching tourism. So birders can make a huge difference just by going down and staying at some of these places, creating this economy that drives conservation.
And that's kind of the principle behind ecotourism, right? Is you're not going to convince people who are struggling to make a living to not be ranching or cutting down trees for altruistic reasons. But if you can convince them that they can make a better living, and in some ways an easier living, by saving the trees and saving the birds and all of the other flora and fauna, and that's really it, right? You've got to go down and teach and instruct and show them how it is in their best interest. And there are a lot of success stories, obviously. And as they grow, I don't want to say your job gets easy, but it might get easier the more examples you're able to give. Call XYZ over in Mindo and see how their life has changed since they set up a few hummingbird feeders and a photographer's blind. And so I think that's exciting. And that kind of ecotourism, I suppose it is ecotourism for some, but ecotourism, I mean, that's so critical to being able to save some of these areas and save some of these birds that we're struggling with, is to show that it can be financially positive for those that are involved, which is very cool.
Yeah, I know there are some people who dislike the idea of traveling for birding because they're concerned about carbon footprint. So we're aware of this issue. At ABC, we calculate and offset our entire organization's carbon footprint. And, we conserve hundreds of thousands of acres of forest. So we're definitely, carbon positive as an organization, but we do actually calculate specifically what our impact is and make sure to specifically offset that. And that's something you can do if you want to travel. There are lots of programs where you can offset your carbon emissions. And I would recommend looking for ones that include avoided deforestation more so than some of the others, because those also have biodiversity benefits as well. So that's what we do. We're heavily involved in planting trees. We're heavily involved in conserving forest. We actually offset all our carbon. But if we don't have birding tourism, a lot of these places won't have a means of sustaining themselves financially. And some of these birds will go extinct. So it's all trade-offs. And for me, I think that the answer to this is calculating and offsetting your footprint. The global footprint of birding travel is so insignificant compared to what's going on with everything else. Yet the benefits of birding travel for bird conservation are enormous. So we encourage people to do that, but encourage them to think about offsetting their travel, calculating it. There's plenty of ways to do that online. It's very easy to find carbon calculators. And if you want to do that with ABC, we plant trees and conserve forest, you can send us a contribution and we will do something to not only conserve more carbon, but also conserve birds simultaneously.
Well, and that's a good point. And I'll tell you, the book that you're going to be a part of, I interviewed 52 different prominent birders from around the country. And that carbon footprint thing is a big issue to some. I think sometimes it goes to an extreme. The benefits of travel and bringing money to other communities and frankly just enjoying the trip and seeing other parts of the world and meeting other people. I understand wanting to make people aware of the carbon issue and how you might want to offset that if you feel good about it. But I kind of draw the line at the people that try to guilt you. Oh my God, you got on a plane to go to, the Galapagos and da 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 da. And I think, yeah, that's what you do. And so it's a delicate balance between making people aware and trying to make people guilty. And I think when people become too focused on a single issue, like just carbon footprint, I mean, you could wind up never leaving your house if you take it, if you keep reducing it and the reduction as you wind up in your living room. But on the other hand, there are tremendous benefits to travel, to the places you're traveling to the people you're traveling with, to the things you get to see. So it's a neat deal. And I like the fact that you offer offset options. And so then, people can do that if they feel that it's the right thing to do. And a lot of people do, which is great. But before we get too far off, a couple of points. Number one, this is the first podcast we've done that isn't in my office. And actually that's my backyard behind us. And
where are you, Scott?
I'm in my living room in Lake Greenwood, South Carolina. And so we
Okay,
live
great.
on this
So
lake and
we might see some anhingers fly across if we're lucky at the back there somewhere.
great blue
That'd be a
heron.
good bird, right, for you?
That would be a great bird. I've seen one in 5 years.
All right.
But we get some great blue herons going by, kingfishers on occasion, Canada goose. They really like the beach. But I wanted to apologize to the viewers because looking at you and looking at me, I can see we haven't worked out the lighting yet. My face is a bit dark, so we will fix that in the future. But with every one of these shows, we're trying to get better and a little bit different and do things. So I just want to let the audience know we're aware of that. Now, backing up, you mentioned ground cuckoos a couple of times. And in the book, one of the questions I ask all my guests is their nemesis bird. And you came up, you said, well, it's this ground cuckoo. It's that ground cuckoo. No, it's this ground. You know what? It's all the ground cuckoos. So tell the audience a bit about your so far unsuccessful search for ground cuckoos.
Boy, well, I've only really tried for banded and rufous vented. And unfortunately, rufous vented walked behind me on the trail, but I wasn't aware of this, and somebody saw it from a distance away, and they failed to alert me in time. So that was definitely a downer. Although it just seemed snow cap, so I was okay. I was all right. But I was kicking myself.
Trade.
I was kicking myself, and then banded ground cuckoo I tried for at Milpay a couple of times. So they have the sheep feeders at Milpay. And I've stayed at the lodge at Milpay as well. And, we were really expecting to get it. And, we get there before light and wait there in the dark. And, as it's starting to get lighter and lighter and lighter, you're seeing all of the ant birds come through and other things like wood quail and some of the quail doves and things like that. And now, it's coming. And then it didn't. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a long way to go to Milpay, Ecuador to twitch banded ground cuckoo. But I see there's times when it seems to be consistently there and then consistently not there. And sometimes I should just get on a plane and go and get it while it's consistent. But you know what birds are like. You'll probably go down and then it won't be there. So yeah, I mean, I love a good nemesis bird for sure. And, it's always good to have one or two. I've managed to vanquish a few recently, but that one's, the ground cuckoos. And I'm seeing these great photos people are taking now, like Sumatran ground cuckoo, coral-billed ground cuckoo in Asia, and those are driving me nuts. That's one of the things about social media and birding. It's like these photographs of things that other people are seeing. It's like making me crazy. Like there's a Siberian thrush in Britain right now, and the pictures of this Siberian thrush are just mouthwatering. And I just know, it would be crazy to twitch a Siberian thrush in Britain, so I wouldn't do it. But it's so tough to look at those pics. And the waved albatross that they got off Bodega Bay, oh my goodness. And the pictures of that are insanely good. So yeah, it just makes you want to go birding more, of course, which is good.
Yes,
it's like swinging that little carrot in front of you saying, come on out, there's always Connecticut. There's a Connecticut warbler somewhere around, it's just like, how many field hours am I going to need to find one myself? And is it too late? Maybe I should have been looking 2 weeks ago, but I was busy. Usual stuff.
I think it's motivating. So again, a couple more things. Number one, if you could make a note and send me a handful of the pictures from your book, I will throw them up on the podcast so the guests can see them. We'll
Great.
definitely we'll put the cover of the book up, of course. So that's there. And then I have to ask you, and you've used the word twitch a couple times, and we're going to get into the fact that you're from England. But I have another guest in the book who's from England who was offended by the word twitch. He said that is a negative for British birders, and I've heard people use it all the time. Is that a thing? He said it's derogatory. It's based on the fact that birders start to twitch when they're getting on a bird they've never seen. Is that an issue for British birders, or is this a one-off?
Yeah, I don't know. You've seen the Star Wars movie where Finn is fighting Captain Phasma, and she says, "You're nothing but a rebel," and he says, "Yes, rebel scum." So yeah, I'm Twitcher scum. That's me.
Well, that's fair.
Proud of it. Proud of it.
Okay, fair enough. On the
No, I
on
mean,
the Nemesis,
everybody has their views on that, right?
yes, they do.
I think there's a sense in the public outside of birding that, are these people completely nuts? But you sort of have to do it to understand the thrill of finding or seeing a rare bird. And for me, there's nothing like it. And for the most part, you're not going to, you'll see that anhinga once every 5 years. But, most of the time, if you stay at home, you're not going to see those birds.
Yeah.
And I've always, ever since I was a little kid and I had the Birds of the World book, I've always wanted to see those amazing birds of paradise and the cock of the rocks and the storm petrels and everything. It's a bug that I got. And if you want to call it twitching, then it's twitching. But for me, it's just been a way of life to, it's a level of color that, it brings the world to life in a way that I always feel sorry for people who don't understand birds and birding, because it's almost like if there was no music, right? If we didn't have music in the world, life would be so much less good. And if we didn't have birds in the world, life would be so much less good. But not pretty much everybody discovers music, but not everybody discovers birds. But for me, like, birds are like music. It brightens up life, and it's brightened up my life. And going out to see these amazing things, I wouldn't give that up. So twitching or non-twitching,
And I like it. I
love it.
like having the goals, and I like kind of chasing things a little bit. I recently interviewed one of your counterparts, Elizabeth Gray, over at the Audubon Society, and her nemesis is a harpy eagle.
Oh, yes.
And it's one of the birds that I've tried to see a couple times and I failed, and so we're talking about doing a trek down there to see if we can find one. But my real nemesis bird right now, and I'm a little wounded still, is a white-tailed ptarmigan.
They are so tough.
I have gone to Colorado the last 4 years to look for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you're familiar with Rocky Mountain National Park, but
yes. Very, very
Medicine
familiar
Bow,
with this issue.
Yeah, Medicine Bow is the spot where you find white-tailed ptarmigan, according to at least eBird and all the reports and everything. So I'm looking and I go, not counting this year, the 3 years previous. And I'm telling you, Mike, to your point about the cuckoo following you, the guy in front of me would get a ptarmigan, the gal behind me would get a ptarmigan, and I just spend hours trying to turn rocks into ptarmigans. So this year I knew I was going to get one. So we went to Breckenridge first, and there were a handful up at Loveland Pass. And I went 3 mornings in a row, drove 2 hours, got there before dawn, never saw the bloody bird. And then we shifted and went up to Rocky Mountain National Park. And as I learned, they don't hang around Medicine Bow anymore. This is the first year where they're not there, which was disappointing. And there's a guy that I was having lunch with one day who's a small owl expert, a guy named Scott Rashid. And his girlfriend is a hiker. And as we're having lunch, she sends videos that she's out on a hike while we're having lunch of white-tailed ptarmigans. And I don't know how well you know Rocky Mountain National Park, but there's a 7-mile dirt road. Right. So there's a 7-mile dirt road.
I know the road.
Yeah. Leads up to the Alpine, right? She said, "This is where I am. Tell Scott this is where I am. If he comes out tomorrow, he'll find him." So I get up the next morning. I'm pumped. It's raining, but that's the way it goes. I'm there before dawn. And I pull up and the work trucks are there, and they locked off the road that morning for the season. And so 4 years in a row, no white-tailed ptarmigan, lots of rocks that look like white-tailed ptarmigan, but I'll get it. I'll get it next year. We're going back next summer and I'll find the thing. But for me, do I wish I had found it? Yeah. But on the other hand, it's kind of fun. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. Whenever you vanquish a nemesis, you gain something and lose something at the same time. But Yeah, don't get me started on white-tailed ptarmigan because I've had my issues with white-tailed ptarmigan. Loveland Pass apparently this year has been better. I've spent I don't know how long I've spent on Loveland Pass. Never saw white-tailed ptarmigan on Loveland Pass, but there are other places. I didn't see it in Rocky Mountain National Park either, but I've seen it in Colorado and I've seen it in Alaska. But offline, if you want to have some other tips for places where you can go and
Absolutely. And I want to get some tips on Mindo as well, beyond what I read in the books. So
yeah.
let's back up a little bit. If those of you that are very perceptive might have noticed a hint of an accent in Mike, and he brought that over from England. And if memory serves from our conversation, a woodpecker was your spark bird in England that got you fired up, what, 15, 18 years ago, probably?
Yeah, great spotted woodpecker. And if you remember the movie The Big Year,
Yes.
they see a great spotted woodpecker in that movie. That movie was pretty good for the most part, but they had a couple of very out of place things. Like I think they had a great gray owl in George Washington National Forest. They had a pink-footed goose on some pond on a mountain in the Blue Ridge or something. The great spotted woodpecker was probably the one that was most out of place because they kind of found it on the roadside somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, which was just like, I mean, anything's possible, right? But that's just not happening. It's like that's an Atu bird, if anything. But that was my bird. Like we used to get in my backyard when I was growing up on the feeder, and I guess it was that kind of got me into the rarity thing because they weren't there every day. They would come once in a while, and it was a big, dramatic black and white and red bird, and it was exciting when it arrived. And so I started to look forward to them coming. And so I started to get into this mindset of looking forward to the unusual birds showing up. And I think that was my training. Didn't realize it at the time, but that was sort of, that's like the brain pattern that was created for me with the feeder and the woodpecker coming. It's like, okay, this reward of seeing this really cool thing and like the dopamine hit or whatever it was that was happening. It's like, that's it. I want to see more of that. And then, of course, it's lesser spotted woodpecker, which has become very rare in Britain now. At the time I was growing up, I did actually get that in my backyard at one point. So there's lots of interesting things with woodpeckers with me. That was kind of one of my starting points. And they still are really cool. Sometimes they evade you and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I like seeing the unusual, or the ones that are unusual for me. I've been birding a fraction of the time that you have, so I have quite a few more that are unusual. But for example, we get pileated woodpeckers here in the backyard maybe 4 times a year. So about 3 or 4 days ago, one showed up, and my heart jumps. I get excited, and it's I find that for me that happens with almost all raptors almost every time. I see a raptor and I just get excited. But in my front yard, we've set up a bird sanctuary, and we've got the blue jays and the titmice and the cardinals and the chickadees and the wrens and, a lot of the standard, what you would expect to find in South Carolina. And I don't get excited when I see them, but I'm very pleased. And I love to sit out front with my camera and a cigar and just watch the birds. It's a different sort of enjoyment. To your point about the dopamine rush, I'm not going to get that on the 17th blue jay I see that day, unless there's a different behavior,
Yeah.
that I've not observed or not observed recently. But it doesn't make it better or worse. It just makes it different. And, like you, I enjoy finding a bird I've never seen before, or one that I don't see frequently.
I think one of the other aspects of this is that if you've seen it in a field guide, 100 times, it's almost becoming like a mythic thing. It's almost like
Yes.
it's almost like movie stars. If you see a movie star in real life and you've seen them in 20 movies, there's some like weird thing that happens that it makes them larger than life. And
Yes.
the longer you go without seeing a red-billed pigeon, the larger than life it becomes after looking at it in the book enough times. And then when you finally might see it, hopefully one day, it takes on a greater significance because it's almost like a movie star in a way. It has a mythic
It
thing to
does.
it for you,
And I
or for me
find
anyway.
I agree with you, and I find that magical and mystical are 2 words that birders use a lot. It was a magical moment, or it was a mystical bird, or whatever. And I think, I'm not saying that birding is better or worse hobby or activity than others. And I've had quite a few in my life, but I like this. I like that you can't guarantee or predict that you're going to get to see that bird. And is it disappointing if you go down specifically and you're looking for a cuckoo and you're there 4 days and You don't find it, and you've got to move on and look for something. Of course it is. But you know what? You'll get it. You'll get it. Now, you
Yeah,
do
it's the
have
unpredictability of it also that makes a big difference. It's like if you want to see the Eiffel Tower, then you're going to go to Paris. The Eiffel Tower is going to be there. It's not going
yep,
to move. No
yep.
problem. You're going to definitely see it. But there's something about that ground cuckoo or that white-tailed ptarmigan, the fact that it's not definitely going to be there, that when you do get it, it's all the better.
It
Um,
is. It is, and I think that's the magic about it. If you're not comfortable with not seeing what you're going after, then just go to a zoo. And you know, the birds are just as pretty. I just don't think they're as interesting or as exciting. And I get the same thing. I'm huge into mammals, terrestrial and marine. You know, the megafauna I just love. I'm writing a book about it now, and I got to tell you, it's you know, you're out on a boat, and we were up in Alaska a couple of months ago, and suddenly a humpback whale breaks the water, and it's like, oh my god, I can't believe I get to see this, you know. And but anyway, now you've got a favorite bird, Kentucky warbler, and you have a little story that I'm going to ask you to share about dressing up for a dinner party. I don't know if you were the only one that dressed up or what this, but
no,
tell us about that.
it was the famous. I think it was called the Birders Ball or something like that. It was held on the Scilly Isles, which is like it's not really like Attu, but it's a similar kind of vagrant trap in southwest Britain when I was a teenager. And so it was back in the 80s when like Two Tone was big and the specials and UB40 and all of that. And so I remember they decided to have this fancy dress Halloween ball where everybody had to dress up as their favorite bird. And my favorite bird at the time was Kentucky warbler. So I went to great lengths to try and dress up like a Kentucky warbler. But the guy who won was black and white warbler. But I think everybody liked black and white warblers because nobody had heard of Kentucky warbler because there'd never been a Kentucky warbler in Britain, but there'd been a black and white warbler. And he had all his two-tone, the specials clothes on. That's what he wore normally. So he just went as himself and he won. So I was a little miffed because I went to all this trouble to come up with Kentucky warbler. It's still never been seen in Britain as far as I know. But it was fun. And
Except for the people that were at that ball.
those people did. I don't know if they all knew what it was, but I thought I did a pretty good job with it. But yeah, I mean, there was something about Kentucky warblers, Connecticut warblers, mourning warblers, and hooded warblers to some degree that I don't know. I think it's the sort of skulky nature of them a little bit. They tend to be a little bit harder to find, and they're not amongst the more common species. And I think it's always a good day whenever you see one of those, and it gets progressively better from hooded's a little bit more universal in Kentucky, and then mourning in Connecticut's like the holy grail of the warblers. But I remember seeing a really nice Kentucky warbler singing in Michigan near Ann Arbor one time, which is a little bit north for them. I guess they're up there, but I just had to dig around really. I got completely carved up by mosquitoes and got very wet kind of getting into this swamp, but finally managed to kind of see it through these leaves. And it was just like this amazing moment. I finally actually saw the birds singing there. And yeah, I'll never forget that one. That was great. So that was kind of
And you
what
worked for it.
got me going.
You worked
Yeah,
for it.
yeah. The more work you do, the more satisfying the victory
I
is
think so, and
in
I
birding.
don't think the birds owe us anything. Nobody deserves to see a bird, but if you go out and you spend some time and you're looking, and maybe it's the second or third time, and a little bit of inclement weather, and then suddenly you're on that bird, it can be magic.
Yeah.
It can be thrilling, and you're right, it sticks with you. It's a rush, and for the people that don't understand that or think it's silly, I feel badly for them, you know, but you know what? Everybody's got to do it differently, which reminds me, now you did things a little differently. You left home at 17. You wound up on Fair Isle, which you had your best birding day ever and you nearly starved to death. Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
tell the audience about that because that seems like, you know, two ends of the spectrum. So tell us about that because I find it fascinating.
Yeah, well, at that time we were all on the sillies again. I don't know if it was the year of the Birders Ball or not, but I remember that people were starting to report there was a yellow-browed bunting on Fair Isle, Shetland, and there was also a Brunnach's guillemot, which is it's thick-billed murre, but they call it
And
Brunnach's
this is a
guillemot.
Scottish island, right?
It's a Scottish island, isolated Scottish island.
You've
And
described it as the Attu of Great Britain?
yeah, it's similar to that. And there's also a pine bunting there. So there's like three big rarities. And I had not seen any of them, but there were people leaving the Scillies and coming back from Fair Isle having seen it. People who had jobs. I was like, 18 or something like that. I didn't have any money, but I did have a telescope. And I remember I was like, this telescope is less important to me than the yellow-browed bunting. So I'm going to sell the telescope. So I sold the telescope to my friend Chris Murphy. And so I had a little bit of money, enough to get off the Scillies. And then I hitchhiked from Penzance to Aberdeen, hitchhiked a plane, and ended up hitchhiking two planes actually, got to Fair Isle. And
How do you do that, by the way? Do you stand on the runway with your thumb out, or
well,
I haven't met a lot of people who have hitchhiked planes.
one of them was a charter flight with the BBC who were filming, and we just talked our way onto it and told them about the bunting and that we needed to go there to see it. And they had a couple of seats and they took pity on us because the story was so crazy. So we got over to Fair Isle, and unfortunately the guillemots and the pine bunting had left, but the yellow-browed bunting was there, and we saw the yellow-browed bunting. So that was great. And I was at a time of my life where my planning wasn't all that great. So I didn't have enough money to get off the Shetlands. I had enough money to get there, but the bunting was really important to me. So I went and saw it, and then I got kind of marooned on the Shetlands and had to get a job up there in the end. But that, there were a lot of birders who worked in the Shetlands. It was a great place for birding. We found all kinds of stuff. We had, I think that winter, we had 5 individual different Ross's gulls, found a couple of Arctic warblers, saw lots of things. So it was great. And I still, the people who I knew at the time, I'm still friends with now, a lot of them. And many of them went on to become bird tour leaders. And, several have written books. Some people are different parts of the world now. People like Craig Robson, who wrote, The Birds of Southeast Asia, leads tours in Asia in particular. He's a real expert on Asian birds. But we ended up making money to go birding, and I traveled in India and Nepal, took 6 months over in the Himalayas after that, backpacking and birding.
Isn't your favorite bird a Nepalese bird?
Well, Satyr tragopan, I think John Franzen always tells me that it's Satyr tragopan, so I should say it correctly, Satyr tragopan. We always used to call it Satire tragopan, but he reminds me that's a form of humor, and it's actually Satyr tragopan. I mean, it's an insane bird. It's like a bright crimson turkey with white ocelot spots all over it. It's like a giant ocellated tapaculo. Yeah, and it took me months to find. It was like, that would have been a major nemesis if I hadn't found that. But in the end, we did find it. So I mean, if you don't know what it looks like, definitely look it up. The tragopans are like this insane group of pheasants. In fact, the group of pheasants in general are pretty crazy. Pheasants and pitters are amongst the top Asian birds, I think, for birders. They're both difficult groups to connect with, and also they look amazing. So yeah, I mean, I sort of got started birding early and started, it was my life for a long period of time. That's all I really wanted to do. And then finally, sort of reality hits, get a job somewhere. So, but I was lucky to get a job in something that I love. And, through all my birding and international birding, it became really clear to me that habitat loss is really taking a toll on some of these species. And all of this enthusiasm for birds that I've got, I want people in the future to be able to enjoy that too. And if we don't do something about conserving those species, it's not going to be something that's available to people in the future. And that's one of my personal motivations for wanting to do conservation. I want my children and other people's children and future generations to still be able to have this joy of enjoying planet Earth in the way that we've been able to, and our ancestors were able to do that. And those species that are, we miss, I feel like the loss of the ivory-billed woodpecker and those things very deeply. And I don't want that to happen to people in the future when they look back and lose, all of these things. But we know better now. We know that they could be lost. We know which species to focus on. We know where they are. We know strategies to help them, to sustain them. So I've been lucky to be able to turn my passion from birding into what I feel like is something useful with American Bird Conservancy, is making a difference to not just birds, but habitats, rainforest, cloud forest, biodiversity as a whole through the conservation programs. And we work all across the Americas, not just in the Andes, but that's the subject of the book. And we have a whole network of reserves that we've set up there with partners. If you can go to them, you may go to the Yanacocha Reserve when you're in Ecuador, or the Chicana Reserve, or where the Andean condors are, close to Quito. But we've got places like that all over the Andes, put exactly where these species are. So we're complementing the national park system by creating and sustaining reserves for species that have been missed by official protected areas. And official protected areas tend to be in places where there aren't land use conflicts. Unfortunately, we're often working in places where the land is being cleared right now, and the only strategy really is to buy it. You can't sort of put it, like you said earlier, you can't put a protected area on top of people's land. That's not any way to work. We have to buy it from willing sellers and then create a protected area based on that. And we've done a lot of this now. We've been doing it for 20 years, and it's a substantial amount of land and a substantial number of reserves. And you can go to them and you'll see what's going on there and the way that habitat has either stayed the same or even improved. And I want to make one last comment about the Mindo area, and in relation to travel and tourism. When I travel around the world and I go back to somewhere that I haven't been for a while, I often worry. I'm expecting habitat to be worse. I'm expecting the conditions to be worse on the ground because, generally speaking, that's what happens. Slowly but surely, the trees are coming down. The habitat isn't as good. And most places I go, it's either the same or worse. Very rarely is it better. And there was a 20-year gap from the first time I went to the Mindo area to when last few years I've been going back there more frequently. If anything, the habitat in that area has improved and the forest has improved, which means from a point of view of carbon, there's more carbon on the landscape now than there was 20 years ago. And it's, in my mind, strongly tied to the fact that bird tourism has been driving all of this local economy in the Mindo area. I mean, you're going to see it. There's a cock of the rock, a giant cock of the rock statue at the main road into Mindo. It's 10, 12 feet tall. There's a massive sign with a flame-drum tanager. That is the sign of Mindo. It's birds. The whole place is about birds and bird tourism. And the habitat is definitely in great condition still.
Well, and so backing up just a step, the ABC in the simplest terms, your job is to save the birds of the Americas.
Yes.
Right? And find as many ways as possible to do that. Now you have habitats watch list. You identify the most threatened bird habitats in the Americas, and that's part of what your team does?
Yeah, that was a science project we just released. But most of what we do is to do with managing habitat. So in Latin America, it's mostly creating reserves and sustaining those through bird tourism, or it's not the only thing we do, but it's a large part of what we do is buying land and sustaining it through bird tourism. In the United States,
partners that you work with, right?
Correct. Yeah, we work with groups like ourselves in those countries, like ProAves Colombia, Fundación Hocotoco in Ecuador, ECOAN in Peru, Fundación Armonía in Bolivia, several groups in Brazil. So, it's a lot of partner work supporting their work to conserve those areas. In the United States, it's really different because buying land in the United States, birds here have much larger ranges for a start. A long-whiskered owlet or a marvelous spatule tail, you can conserve the species at an appropriate scale by buying land. You might conserve a quarter of the entire global population or even more by creating a reserve. You're not going to be able to buy enough land to create a reserve that's going to conserve a quarter of the population of Canada warbler or hooded warbler or eastern meadowlark. It's just the scale is wrong for that kind of conservation approach. So in the United States, we work mostly with people who own land to help manage that land better for birds. And we have foresters, we have grassland management specialists, we have people who specialize in conservation ranching. And we do a lot of work with private landowners, a lot with Farm Bill funding. There's a lot of programs like Working Lands for Wildlife, Regional Conservation Partnership Program, where landowners can get federal funding to help manage land better for wildlife. We work with them to help them access those funds and design land management to improve ranches, family forest lands. And we also work with states and federal government agencies to do similar work. But that's what we mostly do in the United States. And obviously, we've got a significant loss of birds in the United States. We need to turn that around. And it's a variety of different things. But habitat management is a leading issue. We also have threats like collisions with buildings. We're working on different glass treatments. We've got a whole program on that. Feral cats, pesticides. We look at all of those different threats to habitats. The other thing we're looking at right now, excuse me, is managing habitat in Latin America for migratory birds. And most migratory birds are similar in Latin America to the way they are here, although the land area is reduced because there's more land in Canada and the United States. They fan out over large areas. They're not like a lot of the endemic species that have very narrow ranges, wintering ranges. Golden winged warblers winter from Costa Rica to Colombia into Venezuela. There's no single protected area that can save those species at an appropriate scale. Of course, protected areas help and they're really vital, but it's not just protected areas, because if you go to, Mexico or Guatemala or any of these countries, Colombia, migrants are all over the landscape. They're not just in protected areas. They're in small woodlots in ravines. They're moving through areas in coffee plantations, in cacao plantations. They're even in rubber. And so we've really got to figure out how to help conserve habitats in production landscapes. So that's one of our big areas at the moment we're looking at, is figuring out how to improve bird habitat whilst not detracting from a producer's ability to sell products at commodity prices. And that's one of the program areas we are putting our most thought into, looking at green investments, looking at working with lending institutions, working with ranchers and growers to figure out what things can they do at a farm level that won't reduce their productivity, but still create generally more biomass on the landscape, or at least more diverse biomass. I mean, in the case of grasslands, you might not see that as, native grasslands doesn't appear as great a biomass. It can be, but in forested systems, things like canopy, understory, just creating habitat that birds can use that's not going to impact a farmer's ability to harvest and sell cacao, which is essentially chocolate, or coffee, or any number of crops like cardamom even. So that's kind of the holy grail for us, is like figuring that system out on the wintering grounds, because we don't have something like the Farm Bill in most of those countries. At least they have similar types of programs, but generally not with the same amount of funding or, at the same level as we're able to do here with landowners. They're more limited in terms of the amount of money that's available for growers. So we do work with some of those programs, but that's kind of the next frontier for us, is figuring out how to help conserve our migratory birds, which are in fact still their migratory birds as well, maybe more so theirs, because they spend longer on the wintering grounds than they do on the breeding grounds for the most part. How do we figure that out at a scale that's going to be appropriate? And we're working on it. I don't think we've figured it out yet, but we're getting somewhere. And we spend a lot of time working on that and developing ways of working with growers. We got some videos we're putting together on showing growers how to do some of these techniques, which will get them, a good amount of production without sacrificing money, but still creating habitat.
Are you finding that people and businesses and governments are becoming more and more receptive to your message and toward taking action?
It bounces around, I would say.
Okay.
I think in general, people as a whole are more aware of these issues than ever. I think people are more aware of things like climate effects, and because they're feeling them. I think they're more aware of biodiversity loss because it's being discussed. They're seeing information about it. People are noticing it themselves. They're noticing that there are fewer animals and birds around. People like animals and birds, but there's other aspects to it as well. I mean, if in Latin America, for example, in the Andes, farming on lower slopes depends on stable watersheds. And if you're losing forests, then you can have more landslides, you can have more siltation in the rivers, fisheries can be impacted. So I think all of those things are leading people to have a stronger understanding of the interconnectedness of nature conservation with their lives. But I think at the political level, it bounces around.
Okay.
So, we see, in Brazil, there's a much more Amazon-friendly administration now. I think, people have to make a living. So like you said earlier on, people are, on the ground are doing their best to make a living with what they've got. But I think the political spectrum bounces around, but I think overall people are more aware than they ever have been of these issues.
So the focus of your efforts is on birds, but I have to believe that other flora and fauna are benefiting by the efforts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned mammals earlier. A lot of mammals have either, predators have very large ranges, or we don't know much about them. There was a great story from one of our reserves, or a reserve we've helped significantly anyway. I wouldn't call it our reserve. With Pro, I was Colombia in Santa Marta at El Dorado. And there were a couple of people sitting out on the veranda having a drink after dark, and a little mammal popped out, and they looked cute. So I took a photograph of it and shared it with the reserve staff. And it was a red-crested tree rat that had not been recorded anywhere on the planet for nearly a century. Things like that happen. There's some new species that have been of amphibians that have been found at some of the reserves. Pichilaka in Ecuador, where they have the Hokitika ant pillars in the south, has a beautiful little tree frog that was recently discovered. I'm always amazed to find crabs in some of the rivers there. You're on the east slope, so it connects eventually to the Atlantic Ocean, but you're like 2,000 miles away from the ocean. And there are crabs in those little streams at 9 or 10,000 feet in the Andes. It's pretty amazing. And the number of moths and butterflies that you see, and there's lots of really cool mammals like tyras we see. There's definitely night monkeys, tailed woolly monkeys at Abra Patricia in Peru. So there's a lot of mammals as well. And I think there's probably a lot of species that just haven't been inventoried at all. I always look at the moths at Abra Patricia that come out and imagine that, probably 20% of them are undescribed species, but I'm not a moth person, and I don't like to collect specimens like that personally. So I just look at them and wonder and enjoy them.
Well, I think that's fantastic. Hey, as we're getting close to the end, I'm going to throw my email up. If you've got questions for me or about the show or that I can forward to Mike, go ahead and send it to the email that you're looking at right now. But before I let Mike go, I have asked him, hopefully you'll take a look at his book, by the way, Birds of the Tropical Andes, and we'll throw that back up on the screen to remind you. But Mike, I'd asked you to select a book that you thought the audience might enjoy that you hadn't written. What do you have for us?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't highlight some of the books that American Bird Conservancy's board members have written. So I'm gonna focus on those.
Please do.
I mentioned John Franzen, who's a member of our board, and his novel Freedom, which is an absolute epic, focuses on the cerulean warbler in an interesting way. It's a sort of side part of the plot of the book, but it's an important part. So Freedom by Jonathan Franzen, I think, would be recommended. And The Discomfort Zone is another book of his, which has got some interesting birding stuff in, which I enjoyed. The Masked Duck Account, which is very interesting and honest about birding insecurities. Carl Safina is another member of our board, and he wrote a fascinating book, Alfie and Me, about his relationship with a screech owl that lives in his yard, which has been going on for a couple of years, and the familiarity and tracking the screech owl's family and everything that's going on with Alfie. And then last but by no means...
I need to point out, Carl is also a guest in Why We Love Birds, and we talk extensively about Alfie and that experience. So
great.
That's a cool thing. I like that bridge.
Yeah, Carl's a great friend. And last but by no means least is Amy Tan's not so new book, but it's new-ish, Backyard Bird Chronicles, which I think was on the New York Times bestseller list, probably still is, for over a year, and has kind of revolutionized literature in birding. I think a lot of people have got that book, and if you haven't got it, you should have it, I think. Amy talks about her experiences in her own backyard and what she's learned about birds, and I guess what she's learned about herself through birds. But I've been to Amy's backyard, and it's fascinating. She's really developed a little bird habitat there, and she birds very differently from the way I do. She studies individual birds and what they're doing and what their motivations can be, why they do what they do, and she watches individual birds for hours on end to figure out why they're doing what they're doing, which is, I'm like an identifier. And once I've identified the bird, mostly I move on. So I might not, if it's not something I haven't seen before, I might not look at it for very long. Might be like a split second even, unless I'm photographing it. But Amy gets in and studies birds and she has all these revelations that I'm like, oh my goodness, like, I feel unworthy because I'm just like, I skate over the surface and like, oh yeah, it's like, it's definitely a bald eagle. Okay, move on. So it makes me feel kind of like I'm missing something major. Although bird photography and digital photography did actually change my birding style. And I started to learn more about what birds do. I think it made me a better birder actually taking photographs because I started to need to predict what birds would
Yes.
or might do next in order to get a good picture. And I learned more about bird personalities as well. And I think Amy knows a lot about bird personalities. I was just in Florida the other day photographing birds on the beach, and it reminded me that willets, they don't care. Like you can walk up to a willet and the willet will, walk closer to you. Black-bellied plovers, on the other hand, they don't like people at all.
No.
And it's very consistent. It's not like a small data set because I've been photographing birds on beaches a lot, and black-bellied plovers, to get close to a black-bellied plover, you have got to be on your hands and knees or on your stomach, and you've got to move like a snail to get close to them. And
Yep.
preferably like, cover yourself in sand. But willets are like, hey, over here, let me show you my underwing. All good. Why that is, I don't know. But that's an observation I've made of birds by studying them from photography. But Amy's got all of these interesting observations about golden crowned sparrows, one of her main ones, pygmy nuthatches, purple finches, house finches, the Buick's wrens. And she's also had some cool things like Townsend's warblers and other stuff. And she has her band-tailed pigeons and Junior, the great horned owl. So I think you'll really enjoy that. So those are three. There's many others, but I would plug those three.
Well, that's fantastic. Is Amy on your board?
She is, yes.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. I appreciate you sharing those, and I'm sure the audience will consider getting a couple of them. It'd be kind of fun. If you're watching us on YouTube right now, if you're watching us, do me a favor and subscribe. Doesn't take any time. There's no cost, but it does help expand the audience and get the message out there. Mike's message today, some of it's fun, dressing up like a warbler and whatnot, but some of it is fun and important. And the more people we get to see it, the better it is. And so drop a comment, hit like, do something like that. I appreciate it. Stay tuned for field notes. I do that at the end of every show, and it's kind of fun for me to pick one bird or one animal or one park and talk about it for a little bit. And I'm going to do that. And as I do at the end of every show, number one, Mike, thanks so much for your time. I know it's important and you don't have a lot of it, so I very much appreciate it. And number two, I want to say the same thing I do, which is to stay safe and stay curious. You guys all have a great day. Yes, sir.
Scott, and join
Yes, sir.
ABC. Join American Bird Conservancy.
Yes.
As well.
Yes.
abcbirds.org. We appreciate every member and donation. It's critical to us. So if you can help us. And the book is a premium if you join at $50. So you actually get a free one sponsored by Owen. So abcbirds.org. And we would really appreciate your support if you haven't joined ABC already.
That is fantastic. And I'll throw the URL up there so people can jot it down. And, if we can just get a few more members into ABC, that just gives Mike that much more flexibility to make some things happen. So that's
Thanks,
fantastic.
Scott.
Mike, again, thank you, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. So
yeah, always fun, Scott. Thank you, sir. Thanks, everybody.
You too. Hello and welcome to Field Notes. This is our 23rd Field Notes, so it's pretty fun. These just continue to be a blast for me. Today is about White Sands National Park. We just did one on Denali National Park, and eventually we're going to do one on all 63 national parks. So get ready for that. But today's White Sands National Park. White Sands is located in a remote area of New Mexico. Of the 63 national parks we have in this country, this was the 62nd one that was designated. It was in December of 2019 that it became a national park. Following, in February of 2019, Indiana Dunes in Indiana became a national park. And then the one that came after White Sands was New River Gorge in West Virginia, which in December of 2020 became a national park. I've been to that one. It's stunning. I've not been to Indiana Dunes. It's one of only two I have left on the continental U.S. to see, that and Isle Royale out in Michigan. And then there is a third sand dune national park in addition to White Sands and the Indiana, which is Great Sand Dunes National Park in California. So you can go see that trilogy of sand dune national parks. Now, this one in New Mexico, White Sands National Park, is the largest gypsum dune field on Earth. It's 275 square miles of pure white gypsum. And having been there and seen this and spent a few hours there, it is pure white sand. It is really remarkable to see. It's the result of a shallow sea that millions of years ago evaporated, went away, and this is what's left. And over time, it went from a hard crust into this fine sand. You can actually sand sled there. Now, I didn't get to do that. I have done some sand sledding in California along the coast on some dunes. There's a few places where it's allowed, but it is allowed in this park. I saw a lot of people doing it, and it's pretty cool, man. You can just go down on a disc like you do if you're snow sledding. You can go down on cardboard. There's a lot of neat things. Now, this sand is so pure and so bright that at night with the moon, it that reflects the moonlight and it appears to actually glow. And the park rangers there, when there are full moons out, they'll host walks on no other lights except the moonlight coming up off of the gypsum sand. I'm looking forward to doing that one day. Now, you wouldn't think it when you drive through there or hike through there or bike through there. But there are 800 different animal species. There's birds, but there's lizards and insects and mice. And over the years, those animals have tended to turn white so that they blend in with the sand and are less likely to be predated. And so you can see an awful lot, far more animal species than I would have expected, and far more flora as well. Lots of different plants out there. Next door to White Sands National Park is the White Sands Missile Range. Now, it's been closed for testing since 1947, but it was used for atomic testing. The first atomic bomb was tested there in 1945. So that seems kind of dramatic. It shares a border with the national park. In 2021, some footprints were discovered there. 21,000-year-old footprints. The oldest footprints that we have found for North American man were discovered there. And this is always amazing. It reminds me of this. But those footprints are alongside the footprints of mammoths and giant sloths. It just still kind of surprises me that mammoths and giant sloths once roamed North America. No longer do, of course, but maybe they'll come back, but they don't currently. Now, the dunes themselves, they can move up to 30 feet annually. They never stop moving. They never stop shifting. So if you spend any time around sand dunes at the national parks or on the beaches, and there are a lot of beaches on our coastlines here in the States that have these amazing sand dunes, they're always shifting. The wind comes and moves them along, and the plants try to anchor them. It's a constant battle, and it's fascinating to see. But you come back to a place that you've been and you thought you knew, and you come back a year later and it's completely different. Now, if you do visit White Sands, it is in the middle of nowhere. So you're going to get a hotel a half hour, an hour away if you're going to spend the night. It's not on the way to or from anywhere. So you have to make an effort to go there, which I did, in part because I wanted to see it, of course, but in part because I'm trying to see all 63 of the national parks, of which I have seen 54. I visited 54. Inside the park, you can hike, you can bike. There's also just a very pleasant 8-mile loop. It's flat, so the biking is great and the hiking's easy, but it's an 8-mile loop that you can drive through and you can see an awful lot of the park. I've been sharing some pictures that I've taken there, and it is beautiful, surprisingly beautiful, by the way. At least it was surprising to me. I don't really expect a lot out of these large, sand dune areas. But I guess a lot of that was my ignorance, not realizing there were 800 species of animals that you could find on those dunes and how beautiful it looked as the sun was setting. So I want to thank you for listening to this Field Notes. If you get a chance to get out there and visit White Sands National Park in New Mexico, send me a note. Let me know what you thought. Tell me if you thought you loved it and if it was beautiful and worth the trip. And I'll look forward to hearing from you. I'm going to ask you, if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to our station, to our channel. We are trying to reach as many people as we can with our message. We're trying to attract as many guests as we can. And the more subscribers, the more comments, the more likes that we get, which are no cost to you. We don't run ads on this or anything. Then the better chance we have of reaching more people with this message, and the better chance we have of attracting more guests. And as always, I encourage you when you're outdoors to stay safe and stay curious. Thank you for listening.